Okay, I'm here for another episode of Talk to Thorin, and this one is going to be with Kovaak, who is a veteran Quake player, but obviously extends beyond that because, like many Quake players, unless you really are just like Paradox or something, not everyone can just play one game forever. Some people choose to play other games as well. So the main topic of this discussion is going to be the more generalized term, which I realize is not actually that great a term. It's the deathmatch genre, okay? Because there's many games within it, and particularly we're talking about Quake-type games, you know, ones that have 1v1 capability, team deathmatch, hopefully are more... I mean, I've always liked the terminology like arcadey, you know, because it's the idea that, you know, you make things a bit more like OP, a bit more fun, a bit faster, you know, whereas, you know, I want to differentiate it, obviously, from the tactical FPSs, like the Counter-Strikes of the world, the Rainbow Six, whatever you might term those games, and obviously very, very different from something like Overwatch. So let's start out, just to establish this for people who don't know. Like, I realize this isn't like a career interview. I'm not interviewing about all your time at Quake World, but I want to establish that because people need to realize that Quake World is a game that was around a long, long time. I mean, people were playing it in like I think the client actually came out like '98 or something, and people have been playing it since then, and to this day still play it. Like I still dip my toe in every now and then. I'll watch like the finals of the tournaments. But you were someone who. How long ago was it that you actually started competing competitively? Was it like 2003, 2004? Was that era? Were you always playing?
Well, real quick, I just wanted to say that you define it as a deathmatch game. Sure. And I think something that you'll find a lot of people in the community refer to is an arena FPS or arena shooter. Yeah. And that definition of a game, I mean, it's all over the place. And it's really an open question as to what is going to define an arena shooter, whether it's like the movement system, the speed of it, the time to kill, lack of RNG, you know, whatever it is. It's really a big topic, honestly. But
sure.
And then there's like, is Tribes an arena FPS? Is it one of those games? And actually, it turns out there's something called ZFPS, which refers to like, you know, X, Y, Z. So something has like a vertical aspect to it. Right. And outside of that, as far as Quake goes, so Quake 1 came out in '96, Quake World was '97, and I played casually mods back then. And then I moved into looking at the demos of the top players in like 98, 99, because CZM sent me a demo of him just absolutely destroying somebody in a one-on-one. And, you know, he got a score difference of over 110 minutes. And I just looked at it and said, holy crap, that's amazing. Like, you know, what level of skill does it take to get to this? And it kind of got me into it. And I started watching all these other players, and then I was high pinger, so I was dial up until like 2001. I tried Quake 3 for a bit, and then shortly after I finally got a cable modem, I looked into coming back to Quake 1. And I competed in that from about 2002 until 2008 or so, and that's whenever I kind of just went into real life more so.
So, kind of to set the stage, in North America, which admittedly, we'll just go ahead and say for people who don't know, was a much more depleted scene by the time you became a low-playing player compared to Europe, you know? I mean, obviously, Europe itself can survive pretty much almost just off Scandinavia. There's that many people still play the game, you know? But NA famously didn't have as many tournaments, didn't have as many stable teams, and actually even just servers were often a problem. You were in what was, for a period, the most dominant team. You were in this team called American Gangsters, which actually the most famous player obviously was a guy called Death, a Canadian player who was also somehow like European ethnically or something. And he was like the main person known in the team. And wasn't there some stat like you were just undefeated in this team or something? You never lost? Is that true?
Pretty much. By the time I joined the clan, they already had a record of like 40-something to nothing. And I was kind of on one of the competing teams. And I didn't like what they were doing. They were doing some shady stuff with scripts that just looked like you're getting around game mechanics that the people had set up, and I didn't like it. And I brought it up to some of the AG American Gangster guys and said, hey, is this okay? And eventually they poached me, and I joined them and just had a blast. You know, there were stand-up players, and Def got a lot of flack over the years because early on he was one of those guys who just really taunted his opponents as much as he could. But he grew up. He's certainly a much kinder player in later years, and people looked up to him. And it was kind of a weird thing too, because AG, there are certain players in the AFPS community who will point to AG and say, this is the reason that the genre died, or rather Quake World died, because it was just one dominant clan. And I think that's a little bit misleading because people just stopped playing in general. And we actually made quite an effort to revive the team deathmatch scene. We did for a couple of years because we took like half the members of AG and split them into a different clan, recruited some other people, and the other half went to another clan. So like I made a clan called The Boss with some of my friends from AG, and we invited a Capture the Flag player named Ultimo to join us, and he just took it amazingly. You know, he was one of those guys who could see what was going on in a team game and react and just save the team whenever there's something horrible going on. So he picked up on it really quickly, and we had great competitions between the two clans, and then there were other clans that picked up and joined in. We had a number of tournaments even after AG was split. So, I mean, I wouldn't say AG killed the Quake World Team Deathmatch scene, but there are some people who still hold that view.
So one of the things people often wonder about, I know as a European, obviously there weren't that many actual official competitions to watch, and when I saw American Gangsters play, because you were so dominant, I often wondered myself, like, was it just that they'd stacked all the best players? I mean, a lot of these players, even in 1v, obviously Def in 1v1 was a fantastic player now. Did you actually have, like, if you looked at the strength of your team to the competitor teams, were they actually good opponents and they just for some reason couldn't beat you?
I'd say there were two other teams that were comparable in skill to us, and one of them was Fired, and the other was I can't remember that. You know, they changed names throughout the years, just kind of reforming. But basically, these two teams were very highly skilled as well, and they came really close a number of matches. But at the same time, they were one of them was doing the shady things, another was really iffy on the scheduling and waited until like our college connections were unavailable and we were at home on our crappy cable modems and, you know, stuff like that. And we had people crashing in the middle of games, and we still beat them, luckily. There's a whole crazy history over the years, and this is so long ago because it's 2007 now. I'm talking about tournaments from 2004 to 2005, you know. Yeah. But I'd say those guys had potential to beat us, but it was really only 3 teams total that were at that level for the most part.
When you say like that you didn't like some of the things they did to get around the physics, what, are we talking just like rocket jump scripts? What were the things they did at the time? Because I know you're somebody who cares about the physics of the game, right? And the idea of having a high skill game.
Yeah, rocket jump scripts never really bothered me. There was a lot of commotion in the community over that because there was a forward rocket jump script that would spin 180 and then shoot straight, well, not necessarily straight down, but like whatever angle you're shooting at, so you can use it to propel yourself really quickly. That was okay to me. Some people had more objections. One of the mechanics, so Quake was known for its heavy team binds. You'd press a bind, like a key on your keyboard, and it would tell your team a huge amount of information of like, this is my health, my armor, my weapon, how much ammo I have, my location, how many enemies are near me. And some of that information was hidden from you. So you hit the button and it would replace like the number of enemies, 1 to 4 with an X. So you couldn't see it, but teammates could. And then there was another one where you pointed an item and it would say like, red armor is up, come pick it up. And that was also hidden because you could use it through walls. So if you're aiming through a wall and you point at red armor and you press this button, it would say XXX at RA. And then, so that's hidden, but they found a way around it to make it so it would send the message and rebroadcast to you from the server. So you'd see that. So that was one of the things I'm like, that's not right, because you can use that to even point at enemies through walls. And I didn't like that.
Okay, because this is something I wanted to establish, because obviously I wanted to set up the credibility that you played Quake World a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. Now, are you someone who, beyond when you've moved into other games, were you a bit of an elitist when you were a Quake player? You said you tried a bit of Quake 3. Were you someone who, in general, if Quake World had lasted forever, if there'd been enough servers and would you have just stuck with Quake World and never moved on?
I think there are design aspects in Quake 2 and Quake 3 that I really didn't like. The biggest thing was losing the air movement, being able to turn around corners really quickly was pretty big to me, but also the railgun. So like, I didn't enjoy the aspect of you walk around a corner and you didn't hear anything, but your opponent had a railgun lined up to hit you. And that sort of thing always turned me off. And I realized in Quake 3, like there's the idle sound of he has the railgun out so you can hear it, but if he's too far away, you're not going to get that sound. And in Quake 1, the maps were small enough that, obviously there's no railgun. People say like, well, you have rockets that are spamming. But in Quake 1, the maps are small enough that you hear the rocket and there's spam coming, so I can't go around this corner yet. So a lot of the things are more telegraphed in Quake 1, and I appreciated that for Duel.
So it's a bit more intuitive.
Right. And you could always read where your opponent is because the sound system was going to tell you exactly where the guy was. Like on DM4, it's a very small dual map, and anytime somebody spawns, there are only 2 locations from the center where you can't immediately hear it. And one you could see, the other, if the guy fires, you'd see it. So it was just like you knew exactly where your opponent was at any given time, and you could react accordingly. And then outside of that, like, so that's for the duel side. I wouldn't say that Quake 3's duel is more shallow than Quake 1. In fact, I'd argue it possibly might be a little bit more deep, but team deathmatch is a huge aspect. I don't know if whenever you're looking into my past, if you've read any of my posts on Reddit where I've ranted about that sort of thing or not. But to go into that, the Quake 1's team deathmatch is very unique. It typically has like teammates who have a shotgun, and the shotgun's terrible. It's like the starting weapon, and you're doing almost no damage compared to somebody who has a lightning gun or a rocket launcher. So in order to make your team the most effective you can, you need to actually go out of your way, kill an enemy who has a rocket launcher, or take control of where the rocket launcher spawns, let your teammate get the item, and then start controlling the rest of the map. So it had this huge team play aspect where you really need to coordinate with your team. Like you need to sacrifice, because if you have a rocket launcher but no health and your teammate's got an armor, you just want to like let him kill you or shoot a rocket into the wall and kill yourself so he can pick up the weapon and be more effective. And it was, you know, pretty unique. You couldn't drop weapons, so you had to kill yourself like that. But the like Quake 3 team deathmatch, I've criticized it for years and years, and I think if you read up BDK, one of the commentators, he's also shared the similar opinion. He'll tell you that basically the Quake 3 balance is such that you pick up a weapon, you're effective, period. It doesn't matter what your stack is, because you can rush in, you can hit a rocket, you can hit a shotgun shot, you can hit a couple plasma bolts. Anything you're doing, you're going to do significant damage to your opponent. And then even the armor stacks in Quake 3, like you pick up a red armor, it adds 100. You pick up another red armor, it adds 100 and starts ticking down. So whenever you get the armor later, it's going to, you know, it comes back later and you're effectively going to need it again, because you're going to take enough damage from people who have any weapon that you're going to need it. So there's no reason to save items for like your teammates in Quake 3. Whereas in Quake 1, you get the red armor, it absorbs 80% of damage, and if somebody doesn't have a rocket launcher and they try to fight you, you can kill like 4 or 5 people with shotguns and not even need to pick up another red armor. So red armor spawns, 20 seconds later it spawns again, you can give it to a teammate. So Quake 1's team deathmatch, in my opinion, was vastly superior to any other arena shooter that I've seen.
Okay, so that you've laid out quite well there. A lot of, essentially, by contrasting it, a lot of the things you liked about Quake World. So as we discuss this notion of deathmatch as a genre, and the fact that obviously now you don't play Quake World, you've had to play other games. So this point that you bring up at this point, what I'd like to start that discussion with is, I'm sure you've heard before, it was actually a comment that John Carmack said when, I think it was when he was making Quake 3 actually, where he basically said, because if you remember, for the timeline for people who are watching, and obviously weren't around like 15 years ago when we were, when Quake 1 came out, people don't realize this, but Quake 2 came out like, 2 years later or something, and then Quake 3 was like 2 years after that. So at the time, they were like normal games, you made a game, then you just start on the next game. So I understand at the time, Quake 1 and Quake 2 were fairly close together in terms of the eSports side of things. They were just 2 different communities. And I remember when he was making Quake 3, because Quake 3 explicitly was deathmatch only, it had no single player component, there was a comment that he said in some interview somewhere, which was along the lines of like, he didn't like that when he saw someone who was a really amazing dual player play, I mean, in both actually Quake 1 and Quake 2, you could dominate the opponent. You could really be up by 40 kills, but the key thing is you weren't like 40 times better than him. You might be 5% better than him. It's the same as in something like, tennis. To actually destroy someone, you don't have to be that much better, but the game allows you to. Now, Carmack explicitly did not like that, and he even said some classic line that he wanted it to be exciting like a basketball game where you never know what's going to happen in the last 3 minutes, which... Now, to someone who's a purely casual fan, they might think there's a rationale to that. And certainly to people who are generally casual, if you look at the games that are the most popular now, it's probably something to that. Like you look at something like a League of Legends, CSGO even now, there is a watered down component to these games that is a bit like that, they've kind of blurred the line a little bit between how good you can be compared to someone else. So the problem is, if that's inherent within the game design, presumably that's an issue for you, right? Because when you're describing these things and you're outlining it, it sounds like you want to minimize RNG, you want to maximize the elements, that strategy, that actually being skilled play within what happens between even single opponents. What would you say to that?
That's an interesting question. I mean, so, what defines an arena FPS? You're talking about these things like the skill difference. And I've talked about this before in a lot of the other areas, because, as you said, a small skill difference is going to result in a huge score difference in a lot of these games. And that's very true. And I don't know that that aspect is actually as important to me as some of the others. I just enjoy the fluid movement system, an input system that's very responsive. And I generally like games where it takes a little bit longer to kill somebody. So like if you run around a corner, you get surprised, then you don't die to a single headshot. Like that sort of stuff is a little bit more interesting to me than, Counter-Strike. No offense. I just never really got into the realistic shooters, and that's me. So if there were a way to redo the systems so that, if people are somewhat closer in skill, it's still not a complete blowout, because that is absolutely true in any arena shooter. You take any Quake, Reflex, Unreal Tournament, any of the games where somebody has like a slight advantage in map knowledge or a little bit better aim, but they have the same map knowledge, then it is going to be a blowout. And it's kind of unfortunate, but at the same time, that makes the close game, the close matches and close games really, really fun. Because if you go into an overtime game with somebody, this is just like so intense, because you're really recognizing that both of you are clearly very closely matched, and there are a lot of interesting mechanics going on that are keeping it that close. So, I mean, there are ups and downs to it. I could make an argument either way. I think, to me, it's not hugely important that it ends up like that, but if it drew more people in to be able to have, closer games even with a wider skill gap, I think I'd be okay with that. Bigger community to me would be more important than that aspect.
So a trend, and I can say this because obviously I'm someone who followed a lot of games for a lot of years, but it is actually just almost like a worldwide trend in all competitive games that they have essentially capped the physics more and more and more and made it more limited as to what you can do. Now, there is one very interesting exception to this that I'll get to a little bit later. I actually found out from you about Overwatch and the move speed in that game, which is very interesting. We'll get to that later. In general, if you look, so even with like Counter-Strike, they've actually limited the movement in that over the years. You used to be able to bunny hop to some degree in that game, etc.
Right.
They've obviously in the Quake games made it more and more limited. And even when, yes, if you really got good at strafe jumping in Quake 3, you could go pretty quick, but they took out a lot of the skill of doing it. You could essentially just spam the space bar, and then it was still, it became a little bit more one-dimensional in a sense, like you're just going in a certain direction. There's not the same air acceleration as Quake World. So in general, that seems to be a component where I don't know that necessarily was causing such an imbalance, but game developers in general, aside from this rare exception I pointed out about Overwatch, seem to have gone down that road, where they try to make the game more and more limited. Now, yes, I can understand for Call of Duty why you might say, well, I was doing it to be realistic, but some of these other games, they're still fiction games, they're still fantasy concepts. What do you think about this in general? Because it feels like this is a topic that's close to your heart.
Well, actually, I was also going to mention, are you familiar with there was a Quake 3 release, I think it was 1.25, somewhere in the middle of the game's life, where they basically removed a huge amount of speed gain from strafe jumping. They nerfed the lightning gun so that you pick out like half the amount of cells on pickup and stuff like that. Are you familiar with that release?
Yeah, I think I remember it.
Okay, because that got a lot of backlash from the community.
I think it just got reverted immediately, didn't it?
Pretty much. I remember a giant post from CZM on ES Reality where he just said, like, this breaks the game. It's no longer fun to anybody who loves the game, and here's why. And yeah, I mean, the guys at id Software, as amazing a job as they did with the engines of id Tech and Quake, I feel like they really didn't have a clue what they were doing with the balance of the game. But at the same time, you could see early on they're trying to go toward that goal that you're talking about of limiting it in some way so that it has a lower. I mean, okay. people talk about skill caps and skill floors, and is it important to have a lower skill ceiling, or
simpler learning curves? Yeah, good terminology, I think. Yeah.
Right, that's a good way to look at it. And with Painkiller, that's a great example, because Painkiller had a really cool movement system that didn't take that much to pick up. All you had to do was hold one key and jump, 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 and it didn't require knowing which key combinations to hold, which to switch off in the middle of a jump, and like the perfect Excel jump or circle jump where you're turning on the ground and you have your muscle memory tied to the sensitivity to get the optimal amount of speed. And all that stuff adds up to a lot of learning curve time, and you do have to spend like a month or two learning movement in for like Reflex, for example. So would a game be better if it got rid of that stuff and was just easier to pick up? Very possibly, yes. I don't know if you're familiar with Warframe. Have you played that?
No, I've never heard of that game.
Okay. Warframe is mostly player versus enemy. It's got some PvP modes. I haven't even tried it. I'm very new to the game, to be honest. I only started a month ago. But it's got these pretty simple movement mechanics to pick up on, where you hold like a crouch button to slide on the ground, and then you jump, and you do this bullet jump where you twist through the air, like pretty straightforward to where you're going. And then you can glide in the air by holding the aim button, and you can roll jump to go even faster. And you can pick that up in like 2 days and be going really fast. It looks really cool. It's fun. It's simple. And I think that's a step in the right direction compared to, I do love the movement systems of Quake and Reflex and all these games. I think they're really cool to be able to do this stuff. But it wasn't designed. It was an accident. Like, there's no way that anybody can look at Quake 1's movement system and say, this was intentional. We wanted you to be doing these circle jumps on the ground and then twisting and moving these, switching movement keys, because that's just insane. Like, if they wanted that to be a game mechanic, it would have been more straightforward, and maybe it should be.
So you referenced Reflex there. That's in a game where obviously you've been quite heavily involved with it over the last few years, and it's one where people might remember, especially people who are in the Quake community, the buzz around the game initially was it's going to try and combine different elements of Quake. And unlike, as you said, where id Software didn't design some of these movement mechanics, they essentially went into this thinking, well, we want it to be along these lines, and this is how you're going to move and how the armor system's going to work and how you're going to shoot. What did you like about Reflex? Like, what was successful? Like, were there things that you like about it that are different from Quake?
Well, Reflex, you could say, is actually really close to CPM, which is a Quake 3 mod. And that Quake 3 mod was, it was a combination of the Quake 1 physics, kind of the Quake 2 double jumping, but it's a little different, and then Quake 3 strafe jumping. So CPM and Reflex share a lot in common with the physics of that, and weapon balance is kind of close. But where I think Reflex really excels is the map editor. So you can be in game, you can press 0, and then you can move and like click and drag to create things, and you can make walls and floors, and you can just do really cool things with the map system, like straight in the game while somebody's jumping around on the map. And then you can press another button and you can jump and test to see if like anything you've added works out well or not. And the other thing Reflex did really well is the netcode. And so this is kind of a complicated topic, so I'll try to be careful in my wording here because I've not been accurate in the past. But a lot of games have this, Overwatch calls it favor the shooter, and some other games refer to it as peeker's advantage, where like there's a wall and you turn around the corner and you see your opponent and you can immediately shoot. He doesn't see you yet because the you from the server is back here, the you on his view is back here. So as you're turning the corner like this, it's, it changes the dynamic of the game compared to a LAN game, where if you were to do that same thing, he'd be shooting you at the same time you're shooting him. Reflex, instead of having a server rewinding mechanic to determine whether a shot hit or not, it actually does half of that and half of pushing you forward on your opponent's view. So as you turn the corner in Reflex, you actually are approaching the screen and the corner onto your opponent's screen at the same time. And that results in this really fluid feel of like you turn the corner, you get shot by a rail instantly. And the first time that happened to me in Reflex, I had flashbacks of like whenever I was at QuakeCon, because the first time that I was low ping was on QuakeCon because I played on LAN, and it was high ping before that.
Sure.
So I go to QuakeCon, I step over a ledge, and then a guy a couple floors below me instantly hits me with a rail. I'm like, this is LAN. And then I have the same moment in Reflex. I'm online, though. This feels like LAN. And it was just fantastic. And it also... you get an advantage of, like, if you're dodging in one of those games that has backwards reconciliation, the server rewinding to see if you hit, then you don't really know if you're supposed to be dodging your opponent's hit scan shots to the left or to the right, because you don't know if he's hitting you like here and you should be to the side or here. But in Reflex, it's much more accurate. So if you see a beam in your face, you know he's dead on. If you see a beam just a little to your left, he's a little to your left. And it does a wonderful job representing that sort of thing. And I've never seen a game come close to it in terms of netcode.
Okay. So obviously, if you were someone who played in the NA scene in the early 2000s, you are entirely comfortable with the concept of still playing a game that doesn't have a massive number of players and massive amount of tournaments, etc. But even so, one of the problems Reflex has had is it's had its little cult following, but it's never broken into esports. You know, it's never had like the wider acceptance, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Has that been an issue for you in terms of interest in the game? Are you okay with just playing with a smaller community? Do you in any way yearn for a game that's bigger in that sense, to see what that would be like to be part of a wider community?
I think I grew out of the competitive mindset to some extent. I mean, I enjoy it every now and then. I enjoy playing duels, especially. 4-on-4 was fun back whenever I had a solid team. But like a competitive game like Reflex, if it picked up, I'd probably stick to commentary, to be honest. I've done commentary for a couple of Reflex tournaments before, and it's fun. Being able to provide some input as far as what people are thinking, what they need to be doing. That's the sort of stuff that I enjoy a lot more these days. And for Quake 1, same thing. I mean, I used to go back to playing Quake 1 every now and then just to see if anybody could actually beat me in the game. And, I'd pop back in after not playing for half a year or so and just be an alias and play a couple duels. And for a couple of years, nobody was coming close. And then most recently, I hopped back in and I'm losing to a couple of top players. I'm like, okay, I've lost it. So, I'm kind of more on the side of the casual player who just enjoys having a relatively high skill set, but still enjoys playing the games for playing them rather than competing in them.
Do you think that actually, it's interesting. Maybe we can get into that topic that you initially brought up, because I thought the way you phrased it was interesting, that it's true, there isn't really a good term for the genre. Like, the original term was Deathmatch, but actually, obviously, Deathmatch itself is quite poor, because Deathmatch is just a free-for-all, and obviously no one plays that in the competitive mode,
right?
For about 15 years. And likewise, arena shooter, not that great, because as you mentioned, there's a couple of games that kind of would classify in that way, but aren't really anything like a Quake or an Unreal Tournament. So is there a term that you think is a good one? How do you think you should define the genre?
Oh man, yeah, that's an open question. I mean, you'll find people who will say, like, I loved Quake 2 because it had a railgun and it had these cool maps, and you can't really recreate that without copying the maps and the mechanics that are innate to Quake 2. But then you'll find other people who just loved Unreal Tournaments, unique weapons, and some of the modes that were in those games. And then, what's really important to players isn't necessarily like a definition of the genre. It's going to be more relative to the game itself. And I think something else that you'll find is that mods were a major thing back in the day. So rather than there being like a dozen indie games that are relatively close to whatever game you're playing, it would just be somebody takes Quake and then they make a mod, and then here's Instagib, and here's Freeze Tag, and here's Rune Quake, and here's Superhero Quake, and here's Team Fortress. Here's Action Quake. So at what point does a mod lose the identity of the original game too?
Sure.
And I guess I'm not sure how best to answer the question other than to say, like, it comes down to the individual players as far as what was important to them. And if you ask the question, what defines this genre, whatever you want to call it, you're going to get a wide range of answers, because some people really care about the RNG, some people care about speed, some people care about time to kill. Some people want specific weapons, some people want not specific weapons to not be included. So it's all over the place.
So while the imminent release of Quake Champions to the wider public will make some people who maybe don't know a lot about how the industry works think, right, well, this is the next chance, maybe this is where the next big deathmatch type game will come out and it'll be an esports game. While on one hand, I would say that if enough money is put in by the developer, it can be an esport. It can have a scene and it can have tournaments. I know myself from having conversations with people who organize the huge tournaments in the other games that a huge factor is basically how many people play and will watch the game. If you can't get over that threshold, you'll always be a niche game. I mean, Heroes of the Storm is a game because Blizzard basically pays for everything. But beyond that, no one outside of their little world really follows this game. It's not comparable to the other games. So the problem is, at the moment, I feel like there is a Gordian knot that no one's being able to solve, which is how you could have a deathmatch type game, but also have it be a big esport. Because obviously, I made a video along these topics when Quake Champions was announced, actually, where I kind of explained to people that it's not that anything was done wrong really in Quake. It's not that things went wrong. It's that when it was an esport, it was the only esport. And then as it went out, part of how it went downhill is other esports came along that essentially moved into the vacuum that it occupied. They took up the casual end of the game, for example. They had more money from the developer. They were easier to put on, whatever it might be. They kind of took up the reins, and it wasn't that Quake, fucked up and did something wrong, like didn't have skins that you pay for or whatever.
Well, maybe it did. There were a lot of
that didn't help for sure.
Are missing, yeah. But yeah, go on.
But the point I'm trying to make is, to me, the only future I see for deathmatch type games is sort of the CPM, the Reflex approach, where what you do is the hardcore people who want to play these games, who are really into that type of a game, have their own little community, and as a result, you have to it has to be like a grassroots effort. The people who make the game have to maybe do it without the notion that they're ever going to be rich and have a huge game. But at least personally, from my perspective, I don't see a way out of that. Like, what are your thoughts on this? Is there a future, do you think, beyond that? Do you think we should stick with little cult games? Because one thing as a final topic, just to throw in there as a way to color it, is the problem I see with something like Quake Champions is, so a lot of people know that I come from Quake, so they ask me, oh, you must be really excited for it. And I say, unfortunately, I'm not, because I actually think it's a game that has no audience, because what you've done is you've taken a game that's for really hardcore people, and then you have kind of put in some of the more casual elements. But I don't think that alone will win over the casual people. So to me, I think you'll fall between the middle ground, where to me it's the no man's land. It's the worst place to be, because you're not going to be League of Legends, but you're also not going to be Quake. So personally, as bizarre as it sounds, I almost am not on board with the idea. So where are you at in terms of the future of the deathmatch genre?
Before I get into Quake Champions, I wonder if you're perhaps referencing Super Smash Bros. Melee and the revival of that community.
I know that a little bit, sure.
Okay. Yeah, because that, it seems like that was a grassroots effort where there are a lot of people who loved the game, and it just seemed like it was dying, and then suddenly it grew. And, a lot of people point to just somebody spreading it and saying, hey, come play Smash with me. Check out these cool things you can do. And, perhaps that was it. Perhaps it really was a grassroots effort where there was just a group of people who were saying, hey, let's go tell all our friends, check out this game. And personally, I went through college, and I could not get a single one of my roommates to play Quake for more than a week. I tried. And that was by the time I was already teaching people Quake movement physics and trying to, help them out in the game. And people who were already playing the game, I could teach them quite a lot of things and get them interested in a lot of the more in-depth tactics. But the newcomers to Quake saw it, and they're just like, this is too much. I can't get into this. So I don't know what the answer is as far as a grassroots efforts for these more hardcore games. But to get back to Quake Champions, I think Quake Champions is doing some very interesting things in the different champions. So you have the character who can do the Quake 4 crouch sliding jumping stuff, and then you have Anarchy who can do kind of CPM Quake World physics, and that's really cool. I like the idea of merging these communities by giving them a champion that represents their community. But the problem is, it's more than just the physics that ties these communities together. So you can't just add an Unreal Tournament character and say, hey, now the Unreal guys are going to join us and we're all going to be happy. Because the Unreal guys are used to a completely different system. They're not used to their opponents moving so quickly and grabbing all the items. They're not used to the way that, items respawn in different certain ways. So it's still a different game. Unfortunately, it's not. It's a cool idea to have champions to like merge people into this one, under one house here, but I don't think it will succeed in that sense because there are just too many other things that they cannot compromise on. And then regarding a lack of an audience, I think you're right. I've heard that Quake Champions on Twitch is down to like 400 viewers typically, and there's like more people watching the latest Super Mario type stuff, and it kind of is what it is, unfortunately. It would be really cool if Quake Champions were to pick up. I've written a couple of things as far as feedback for the Quake Champions gameplay itself, and as always, I'm not a fan of the railgun. I think that especially with the Quake Champions is now, people have lower health and armor for the most part compared to even Quake 3. So having a railgun that does as much damage as a Quake 3 rail is just like, it's too powerful. And they tone down the damage just a little bit, but still, I think the defining point of Duel in the game is who can hit the rail and then dive on their opponent before he can escape. And that sort of thing is just not that engaging to me. Rail shots come down to a little bit of luck whenever you're at a high level of game, so I'm not too interested in the duel aspect. And since I've complained, I was talking about the team deathmatch stuff a little bit ago with Quake 1. A major reason Quake 1's team deathmatch worked out is because you'd have points in the game where your teammates are useless and you needed to do something to help them. I don't think that could succeed anymore. I don't think you can make a majorly popular game off of the idea of, I'm going to start the game and I'm going to be useless, because somebody who's new to the game is going to be useless 99% of the time. So that's just not going to work either. Maybe there's some other way to compromise on it. And something I suggested in Quake Champions feedback was, what if the heavy armor and the armors and the weapons, you pick them up, they go away, but your teammates can collect them for another like 5 or 10 seconds. Because then you'd be encouraged to actually control a spot for your team. So you pick up the armor and then say, hey guys, come get this armor, and then we'll rush out from there and take over another area. And I think that'd be pretty cool for coordination of the game, getting team modes to actually matter. But it seems like they don't care about team deathmatch as a competitive mode anymore. It seems as though they're focusing on duel and sacrifice. And sacrifice I haven't followed too closely. I've watched a couple Twitch streams here and there of people playing it, but it just doesn't seem like my sort of game. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should give it a more fair shot.
Okay, so an aspect that might sound to people who are watching the interview very abstract and like such a nerdy thing to ask about, but I wanted to talk to you about, is actually the concept of mouse acceleration. Because that's actually one of the ways I rediscovered you. I knew you from the Quake World days. I knew a little bit about Reflex because I've obviously followed ES Reality. But I actually found a lot of the posts you made where you were talking about mouse acceleration on Reddit, basically, and you were telling people how to set up the Povo hat utility, that was it. That allows you to really, really specifically narrow in on this. Because I feel like this is a topic that anyone who used to use mouse acceleration and knows what it's capable of, it's actually astonishing to me that this doesn't exist almost in games. Like, if you look at, if you go through the history, okay, because I used to play with mouse acceleration a long time ago, and part of the reason I stopped was because of games like Counter-Strike, because in Counter-Strike, there was no setting in the actual engine that allowed you to put mouse acceleration. It wasn't like Quake 3, and so what you used to have to do was, I still used to use it, but I had to actually buy like a mouse that had it in the drivers, basically. Like, I'd get like a Logitech mouse, and I would have like, 3 options for the setting, for the threshold, and I couldn't tweak it, like, for example, I always used to think, this is something you can do. I used to like the kind of axel where you set it so that it only went to a certain threshold, you hit up to a certain speed and then it doesn't go beyond that, You couldn't do any of that. It was just almost linear. Not literally, because I'm not a mathematician, so I don't know if it was, but, it was almost just like a multiplier, basically, I guess would be the term. And so the problem with this is, because Counter-Strike became so big, there's a famous thing which everyone in FPS games, and most of them have never looked into axel, that's what they tell you. They tell you, right, what you need to do is turn axel off entirely. Don't ever use it. It's terrible. It makes you really inconsistent. You can't hit any shots. And just to give people context, first of all, part of it's the driver thing I just mentioned there. No one had control over axel in a very precise manner. And so you were just putting it on in a way where it might not be that great. Secondly, there's the fact that especially if people are ever going to go to someone else's house or a LAN tournament, because it's so difficult to set these things up, it's another thing to put you off it. And then finally, Counter-Strike as a game is one of the few games where, even though I don't agree that it shouldn't have Axel, because I've used it very successfully, I will say that because in Counter-Strike's a very one-dimensional type of aiming, it's all hit scan, and it's all often like, mid-range hit scan. To some degree, maybe that game doesn't emphasize it as much because movement isn't as key, and you don't have the different types of weapon, you don't have projectiles and these sorts of things, So I can almost understand, I can almost forgive sort of the heathens who don't understand. But in a world where now, as I'm kind of getting to, we have these utilities that allow you to very specifically set all the aspects of Axel that you could want. Can you kind of explain to people what is good about Axel?
Okay. Yeah. So mouse acceleration. I too was one of those people who tried different mouse settings way back in the day and found out Quake 3 had a CL mouse accel command that allowed you to specify exactly how much acceleration you were going to have, and just a subtle amount of mouse accel would allow you to have the control of a low speed mouse sensitivity, but you could also do a fast flick and then suddenly you're turned around. And that sort of advantage is just huge in a game where you need to do long-range tracking, but you also need to react to somebody who spawned or teleported behind you. So I think there is room in Counter-Strike. Again, I'm not a Counter-Strike player. The last time I played it with a human in a Counter-Strike server was probably 2001. So don't take my word as gospel here. But I have run into a lot of Counter-Strike players who tell me, hey, I tried out the driver. I love it. I think it's doing great things for my game. I can check corners really quickly and then flick and track amazingly. And like that aspect of being able to flick and track is just great with the mouse accel driver, because as you said, you have options to set like a starting mouse sensitivity. So say you want like 50 inches to a 360 for long range tracking. And then if you're moving your mouse a little bit faster, it goes up to like 30 or 25 inches to a 360. And you can even make it go quite a bit higher to the point where you can flick with your wrist and do a 180. And, a high amount of acceleration is a little bit harder to get used to, but once you're used to it, it is highly effective. One of the things you were talking about is the games don't have options for it. And I think that actually might be a good thing, because if the games had options for it, they would not be universal. There'd be something wrong with it. Historically, so the way game engines work is just before it's going to draw the frame of where you're looking, it decides, hey, how far has the mouse moved since the last time that I was supposed to update the frame? And it checks that distance. And then if you apply mouse acceleration at that point, that means that, hey, what if it took twice as long to draw that frame? Now your sensitivity is like doubled just because you have a lower frame rate. So the only game that I'd recommend using the in-game options for mouse accel would be Reflex right now, because Reflex actually pulls the mouse at 1,000 hertz even whenever you're not drawing frames. So no matter what, you're going to get mouse acceleration consistently with Reflex. And Quake 3 and Quake Live, you're probably going to get consistent FPS no matter what, so that's safe to do it there. But if there's any game where you're fluctuating in frame rate, don't use the in-game mouse acceleration options. And so the driver's advantage is that it's doing those calculations every mouse movement in between the game's frame updates. So that's something that is going to grant you a lot more stability in muscle memory. Something people point to all the time as a downside of mouse accel is you'll never have good muscle memory. That's absolutely not true. I can safely say that once you've practiced with mouse accel, you know how far you have to move the mouse to get, from here to here on your screen, but also the speed factors in, and your muscles can adapt to that as well for, any muscle memory purpose. And honestly, the flick shots are just beautiful with mouse accel. I've had much better luck with flick shots in mouse accel than not mouse accel. And I was somebody who played without mouse accel until about 2008, other than trying it on and off. Maybe even 2009 or 2010 is whenever I switched to it. And then I helped out with the mouse driver, and I made the GUI that shows you the curve and lets you save different profiles and apply it whenever you're in different games. So, that sort of stuff is good. And I should also mention that if you have a mouse accel curve in the driver, all you need to do to convert the curve from one game to another is match the sensitivity from whatever mouse sensitivity conversion site you might use. And, if there's a calculator online that tells you to do this from Counter-Strike to go into another game, you just use that. And on the other hand, if you're playing a game like Counter-Strike and you need a really long-range tracking, then you jump into Quake. You probably don't need that long-range tracking. So you could increase your starting sensitivity so that you don't have that crazy accuracy at long ranges, but you could keep your flick sensitivity the same. So if you're used to wrist flick being a 90-degree turn or a 180-degree turn, you can keep that the same between games and maintain that muscle memory, even though your tracking speeds are a little bit different. So, you gain advantages by diving into this world of mouse excel regardless, if you spend the time into it. And a lot of people do spend the time to look at it and then they go, this isn't for me, and that's fine. It isn't for everybody, but I've had a lot of success with it.
I mean, for the people in Counter-Strike who ever used to say that, that's one of those things where I have to just sort of like roll my eyes and say, you're very naive, because I'll show you like a Quake player who's got better aim than you'll ever have, who uses mouse excel to flick shots all over the place. I mean, there's obviously some very famous examples. But I'll ask you this, okay? The reason why I say it's kind of crazy to me that that's just something that's of a past era, that except for hardcore people who are into this sort of thing now, it just doesn't exist for most people. It's not an option. In fact, the first thing they do, as I say, is they tell all the beginners, turn this off, make sure it's never on, and then you're good, Because I feel like if we were in a world where everyone had access to this app, I mean, as in knew about it and understood the concept, and every pro gamer in every game had the option at every LAN tournament, you could install this, you could set. I feel like there should be a natural revolution. Like, a lot of pros could be even better if they had. I mean, think about this is why I said I actually have played a lot of Counter-Strike with mouse excel, and I'm not going to say I was a really good player myself. That's me. It wasn't the mouse excel. The mouse excel definitely helped. Like, I used to use a sensitivity where, as you're saying, coming from Quake, that's one of the reasons I used Axel, because in Quake I used to use one of those, like the fatality type set. Well, what you do is you have a low sense but a very high Axel, so you can do the lightning gun, but you can do the 180 flick, to make the turn. So I thought, well, that's literally applicable to Counter-Strike. You want to do very, very long-range spraying, but you want to also be able to check a corner when you run around. So I can tell you it worked a lot. And when I think about some of the amazing players who just played their entire life with one-to-one mouse movement to this real speed, some of these guys could have been artists in the game, of what they could have had this precise control.
Absolutely.
Is it naive to think that, do you think?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if you look at there was this post on ES Reality. I've referenced ES Reality a couple times. It's a Quake community site, which might not be the most friendly, but nonetheless, there are a lot of people there and a lot of good posts. And one of them was just like a listing of all the settings of pros over one of the recent tournaments. And it was like 2012, so not that recent. But still, if you look at the list of players there, it was like the top 10 or top 12 players. There were all but 2 who were using mouse excel. And even one of those,
Live, right?
yeah, in Quake Live, and one of those players was using a mouse with innate mouse excel.
Okay.
Yeah, so you point at this and you think, well, why are all these guys using mouse excel? Because it's actually good, So I do think that honestly, people can gain a lot better control over mice if they spend a little bit of time with the driver, and it has served a lot of people pretty well. And I've got a lot of good comments on the blog and the YouTube videos and that stuff. And the one downside, as you said, though, is tournament acceptance. Yes. So QuakeCon 2016, there was a Quake World tournament, and I was thinking about going initially, so I sent an email to the admins and said, hey, would it be possible to install this driver on the tournament machines if I showed up? And they said, yeah, sure, we'll add it to the default distribution. And I'm like, oh, awesome. And, I have a little bit of name recognition in Quake 1, so I guess it wasn't a problem, but I've had a couple of friends who say, hey, I'm going to this CS tournament, and they're just not cooperating with me. They don't want to install this. Is there anything you can do? And, I shoot an email, get no response. It's like, nah. So, yeah, that might be a problem in actually getting people to recognize it's legit. It is not one of the ways to cheat.
Sure.
At least not to my knowledge. I don't know any cheats that use it. Maybe they do use the interception driver, but I suspect there are better ways than that.
So I thought, just as a curiosity, I'll bring this up again that I referenced before, but I saw a post by you where you were talking about how you'd calculated like the speed that someone moves from. I mean, it's essentially like the equivalent of like you start at nothing and then how long it takes to make the first movement, right? And what you showed was in games like Quake, I forget the number. Let's say it was 210 or something, whatever the unit was.
Yeah,
Quake 1,
Quake 1 to Quake 3 was like 200 milliseconds to 250 milliseconds if you're strafing in one direction and then you stop and you turn in the other direction to go from full speed to the other. So if you want to do that, then it's about 200 250 milliseconds depending on the Quake game. Overwatch is a tenth of that. Yes.
So this is the point, because famously one of the things that people always liked about Quake was, I mean, the simple way, if you're not a physicist, and I'm not in any way, so we used to just call it inertia. You know, you sort of carry on a little bit, and then what's fun is once you've done it a lot, you are kind of moving in treacle, you know, but it feels good in a way. You just get used to it. It feels like there's a flow to it, you know. Now, what's bizarre is, even though, as I pointed out, most games actually have gone the approach where it's slower and slower movement, you can't move in the air. In that case, do you have any clue why? Because Overwatch is like a stark departure from that. It's actually faster. It's almost like what Unreal Tournament felt like in that sense. You know, you can jaggedly move around in sort of harsh angles. What would you say about that?
Yeah, that's a weird anomaly, to be honest. Are you familiar with the OW Discord community?
No.
So there's a pro community of Overwatch players, and I was invited there because Slasher's involved and he knows me. And initially they were asking for, like, it was during the beta phase, and they were just asking for feedback from pro players of what they think of Overwatch to pass it along to the Overwatch devs. And we had like this forum set up where people could make posts and then upvote them, and the most upvoted would be looked at. And a lot of the complaints were like, people are too fast. They can dodge too quickly on the ground. It turns it into an RNG based thing of, are you actually going to hit? And it's not real RNG. It's, dodging patterns, honestly. And people just didn't like it coming from Quake because it does feel different and they can rapidly strafe and be very erratic. It truly is an anomaly because you would expect for Overwatch to be a game where people say you win based on whenever you hit Q at the right time or whenever you don't hit Q, like that sort of thing. But it's suddenly a change where, hey, this is actually a higher skill cap because you have to pick up on your opponent's dodging patterns while you're shooting at them. So, yeah, I mean, that is a weird one. I agree.
Do you think it's a good thing?
I don't know. I mean, is it satisfying to be better at dodging than it is to be better at shooting? I guess that's the question. And dodging is always a fun thing whenever you feel like you've got a good idea of what your opponent's trying to do and you can make a miss. But on the other hand, it's a toss-up. I really wouldn't say it's better or worse.
Like, what do you think Quake would be like if we had much more rapid, like, ability to turn corners in this way?
You'd probably have lower effective DPS on the lightning gun, so Quake 1 would be barely impacted because Quake 1's lightning gun is practically the BFG of the series. Quake 3 would be a little bit more impacted because Quake 3's lightning gun was like close to dominant, especially at the end of the game, because it was just higher DPS and people had better mouse technology and, higher end CRTs at the time that were just getting higher refresh rates than what is typical of the older days. And so it probably would have shifted Quake 3 to the point where it's more projectile based, I would say, if that was the case. And, Quake Live, similar story, because right now the games are balanced so that lightning gun is not the dominant weapon, but it's very viable in a lot of fights.
Since you have kind of alluded to the fact you've kind of moved beyond the competitive days, like, you dip your toe in sometimes for fun, but in general, like, you like to play the games and you like to be involved in the community, and you've given feedback to different developers and different people saying, this might sound very naive, isn't a possible path in the future? Shouldn't being a developer be something you look into? Or designer, whatever capacity, your skill set would apply?
That'd be cool. I certainly don't have anything that, right now I'm a computer engineer at a nuclear power plant, so it's a little bit far from the game development side of things. But yeah, I mean, that would be an interesting career move. I wouldn't be against it if I could support my family. I've got a 4-year-old son, wife, and so that's part of why I'm away from the the competitive side of things, because I just don't have the time for the actual staying up with the competitive games these days. But yeah, it would be cool to be involved in game development like that. And I've been programming since I was 10, and I've been messing around with a first-person shooter aim trainer just trying to make something as a generic tool to teach people how to aim at opponents that dodge kind of realistically, even though it's not being driven by a real person. And, that's worked out pretty well.
One of the reasons why I can understand why some of those guys in Quake World still play to this day is because if they really... The enjoyment and the satisfaction of the game came so much from that game. There's not a lot of traces of it have gone into the future games. The DNA hasn't really carried on from that. It actually has kind of come from the Counter-Strikes of the world, etc. And obviously Quake 3 is much more dominant genetics in that sense, if you can use that terminology. So I can understand why those guys, even if the scene gets smaller and even if there's less opportunity, they'll still kind of just wring every last drop of water out of the sponge, to use the analogy. Are you someone where when you play games like Reflex now, or you try out games like Quake Champions, is there still enough there that keeps you going?
Well, from the competitive side, I don't think so. I think like I said, I'm pretty much past that. I've always had a soft spot in my heart for action RPGs and just grindy stuff every now and then, which, by the way, brings me back to Warframe, which I'm dearly loving right now because it's a shooter where you can grind. So it's, I fall into little games like that and just enjoy playing them. But whenever I look at Quake Champions, I think this would be neat if it would pick up again, but I don't think it's for me, even if it did, unfortunately.
Okay. At the end of the interview, do you have any final message or someone you want to thank or say hello to?
I think I'll just say, if you're interested in arena shooters, deathmatch games, the arena FPS community is a great place to start. There are a lot more games than the ones we've mentioned. I don't even know about a lot of them, Xenotic and Warsaw, and there are a whole bunch of cool ones. I think Doombringer is getting a lot of hype these days, but it's a cool genre. Unfortunately, it does not have that many players, but if you can find a friend who's around your skill level to play against, then you can have great games going back and forth, learn maps, pick up some really cool strategies, watch high-level players and just go, holy crap, it looks amazing, and learn new tricks. It's, personal progression. You'll find a lot of times that you'll pick up these new skills and it's very rewarding. It's fun. But if you tend to get too angry at the competitive side of things and you rage quit all the time, maybe it's not for you. But nonetheless, it's been a fun genre throughout my life, and I think I grew a lot from it, just playing through the competitive side of it, and it was fun.
Hey, it's Crumbs. You're lost? How do you not know where you are? It's Thorin's channel.
What's up, guys? This is Jordan Nothing Gilbert.